The fight over culture is no longer in the shadows. It's right in front of us. What if everything you thought about fairness, progress, and equality was being manipulated? Today's buzzwords lies a movement designed to reshape how you think, how you live, and even how you speak. Charlie Kirk pulls back the curtain, exposing the agenda that mainstream voices would rather keep hidden.
Personally, I'm someone that really values free speech, right, and like an uninhibited engagement among people that disagree. And it's really unsettling to me that you have this website, professorwatchlist.org, right?
Yep.
That basically tells conservative students that, hey, these professors are very liberal, and you should avoid them.
It doesn't say avoid them.
The official statement I read said it
Just to expose.
Okay, fine, expose. But even in that, I feel like that colors...
Okay, so what is this site all about? Professor Watchlist is run by a group called Turning Point USA, and their official line is that they're just exposing what they call radical ideologies in academia. They say the goal is to help students stay informed about professors who hold these extreme or controversial views. They're not telling students to avoid these professors outright, but let's be real, if you're told a professor holds radical beliefs, it's going to influence how you view them, right? But here's where it gets tricky. Critics of the site argue that this kind of exposure creates a preconception that stifles open-mindedness. It's like walking into class already thinking this professor is biased or they're trying to push an agenda. How can you genuinely engage with their ideas if your mind is made up before you even hear them?
So that it really teaches conservative people.
Do you think when a professor says something like the hurricane victims of Houston deserve to die because they supported Trump, do you think that professor should be called out for that?
I think, yes, it's important to call them out, but I don't think it's...
So that's what our project does.
Oh, I understand what you're intending to do, right? But how it's received is it's something where it's really, you're coloring their speech to where it's not free speech.
Let's talk about the criticism. Some people say the watch list is less about free speech and more about silencing professors by painting them as villains. And it's not just about what's on the site. It's also about how people interpret it. For example, what happens when a professor's statements are taken out of context? Imagine someone saying, the Constitution is a white man's constitution. That's a bold claim, no doubt. But what if the professor was actually leading a nuanced discussion about systemic biases in history? Context matters, right?
No, but we're not saying it's not Professor Blacklist or Professor Hitlist.
But
we're not saying they should shut up or be fired.
But for example, so this one professor, I think his name was Alberto Ponce.
Okay.
I was reading the list and it said that he was basically he was saying these things and he was saying that, oh, the Constitution is a white man's constitution.
Yeah, it's a quite radical sentiment.
Sure, it's a radical sentiment, but it's protected by the First Amendment.
No doubt.
Supporters of the watch list argue that context isn't their responsibility. They're just reporting what professors say, often citing articles from mainstream outlets. But critics point out that creating a platform like this amplifies these quotes in ways that can lead to misunderstanding, or worse, hostility. Here's where the debate gets even more heated. Could this kind of exposure incite harassment or even violence against professors? Opponents of the site say yes, but supporters argue that's like blaming a news outlet for covering a controversial story. We're not responsible for how people react, they say. What do you think? Should they bear some responsibility for how their platform is used?
It's something
you and I will agree on, right? Yeah, he has a right to say it.
Right.
But also, my opinion would be we as conservatives need to signal where that radical ideology is present. And I don't understand, these professors, we're not misquoting them.
Yeah. No, I understand
all this
that.
stuff is, we're just making
but
them more
would you agree
famous.
that it's taken out of context, though?
But that's not my fault if someone takes something out of context.
But
so if I says your
providing
sweatshirt is red,
statement.
it's not anyone's fault except the interpreters.
Now let's get to the heart of the issue, free speech. Supporters of Professor Watchlist claim they're using their free speech to highlight problematic ideas. They believe they're actually encouraging more dialogue by signaling where radical ideologies exist. But here's the catch. Does exposing someone's views in this way really encourage dialogue? Or does it make people less likely to engage because they're afraid of being labeled or judged?
Sure, but you're providing this platform for people to spread this misinformation.
Not necessarily.
You don't think it's a platform where people can spread misinformation?
You can say the same thing about the internet or Twitter or Facebook. It's not incumbent on the person who creates the platform to be responsible for how people interpret it.
Of course, but a lot of times when there are people kind of discussing this thing and they hold a similar view, then it creates something that's akin to blacklist. At least that's how I feel.
Okay.
Think about this. If you're a student who hears that a professor is on the watch list, are you going to feel comfortable challenging their views in class? Or will you just avoid them altogether? Critics argue that the watch list creates an environment where students might disengage instead of engaging more deeply. And isn't free speech all about open dialogue, even with people you disagree with? Supporters fire back, saying that knowing a professor's ideology helps students be more prepared to challenge their ideas. But is that really the same as engaging with an open mind? That's where the lines blur.
It's a lot like, the sentiment reminds me of something like McCarthyism.
So
you're creating this list of people.
Well, okay, so first of all, McCarthy never published his list.
Sure.
So we have a list and we're very public about it.
Yeah.
Secondly, McCarthy called for the termination of people. We've never called for any termination of any professors.
But would you agree that you can incite some degree of violence against us?
No, not necessarily, none whatsoever. I mean, the same would be said if a news reporter, by the way, all these professors we have on there were reported on by other news outlets.
Let's address the elephant in the room, McCarthyism. You've probably heard this term thrown around in debates about the watch list. Critics say it's similar to McCarthy's infamous blacklist during the Red Scare, where people were labeled as communists and faced severe consequences, including job loss. Supporters push back hard against this comparison. They argue that unlike McCarthy's secret list, the watch list is public and transparent. Plus, they're not calling for professors to be fired, just exposed. But even if it's not McCarthyism in the strictest sense, does it create a culture of fear? Critics say it might, especially for professors who feel like they're walking on eggshells every time they share a controversial opinion.
Yeah.
So we cite it all.
Yeah, I understand.
So why not be mad at Huffington Post for all their articles they write about?
I guess my main question to you is basically with all this, right? My feeling is that it inhibits this free engagement because it tells people beforehand that, hey, this is what that person believes.
I would disagree. I think it encourages more speech.
Let me ask. All right, so my question is, how can you guarantee that this is not going to inhibit free speech?
Let's bring this debate to life with some real examples from the watch list. There's a story about a professor who allegedly said that hurricane victims in Houston deserved what they got because they supported Trump. Harsh, right? Another professor reportedly called the Constitution a white man's constitution. And then there's the Georgetown professor who allegedly said Brett Kavanaugh's family should die. These are some extreme statements that have landed professors on the list.
You can never guarantee it, but we're using our right to free speech to encourage more speech.
Are you encouraging more speech, or are you silencing that speech?
How are we silencing it?
You're silencing it in the sense that you're telling students that, hey, this person has this preconceived notion, right? So you're giving students this idea that, hey, this professor thinks these things, he believes these things.
So then
when they take that class, they're not going to go into it with this open mind.
But here's the thing. Are these quotes accurately representing the professor's overall views? Critics argue that the watch list often cherry-picks statements, stripping away the context. Supporters disagree, saying they're just reporting what's already out there. So who's right? And does it even matter if the end result is the same? A professor's reputation is impacted, and the classroom dynamic is potentially altered.
And these free thinkers, they're going to go into it thinking, hey, this professor has this ideal. I should know that when I
But what's wrong with that?
I think the thing that's wrong with that is
Maybe they're more aware.
That's literally antithetical to free speech, would you say?
It's not.
I think it's important to engage with someone and rationalize their ideas,
Of course,
instead of viewing them beforehand.
So when a professor says something like the hurricane comment, which is a real something the United States press said, or from University of Houston, or when the Georgetown law professor a couple weeks ago said, we want Brett Kavanaugh's family to die.
At the end of the day, this debate isn't just about Professor Watchlist. It's about how we handle free speech, controversial ideas, and the balance between accountability and censorship. Supporters of the Watchlist believe they're shining a light on radical ideologies, empowering students to challenge them. Critics argue that it's more like preemptive judgment, shutting down open-minded engagement before it even begins. And there's another layer to this: the power of platforms. Whether it's a website, social media, or even a news outlet, platforms shape how we interpret information. So while the creators of the watch list might say, it's not our fault if people misinterpret this, critics argue that the very act of creating such a list has consequences.
They should be made famous when they say stuff like that.
I don't think they should be made famous, though, because then you're inciting violence against them. You're
How are you inciting violence?
You're inciting this negative sentiment.
It's like saying a
tourism,
newspaper
right?
incites violence when they cover anything.
But would you agree with me in saying there's a significant difference between a newspaper that's a public outlet and something like TPUSA and something like this, where you have a bunch of like-minded people, right?
So where do we go from here? How do we strike a balance between holding people accountable for their words and ensuring we're not stifling free speech? Maybe the answer lies in how we engage with controversial ideas. Instead of walking into class thinking, this professor is biased, what if we approach these situations with curiosity instead of judgment? It's not easy, but free speech isn't supposed to be easy. It's messy, uncomfortable, and often frustrating, but it's also one of the most important tools we have for growth and understanding. Thanks for watching this video. Whether you're for or against something like Professor Watchlist, the conversation itself is worth having. What do you think? Does the watch list promote free speech, or does it cross the line into censorship? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and let's keep the dialogue going. See you in the next video.